Hello and welcome everybody, this is the one and only Sugi JRPG here, and today I have the great pleasure to be finally reviewing the Tales of Zestiria, a game that I bought back in release in 2015 for PC. And back then, I maybe played the first 10-12 hours of it, and then I kind of lost interest and also started playing other games. And then last year I decided maybe it's good time to actually start playing these games on your Steam library and finally complete them. And after months of trying to get myself motivated to play the game, the idea of actually dropping a review one day on the channel was probably the prime reason I was able to finally complete the game yesterday. And first I want to talk about gameplay related stuff such as the combat, the item systems, the equipments, graphics, FPS, the audio, the music, and the dubs, and then kind of go into the story aspect. So there will be some type of a spoiler mark when we're gonna be going into the story section. So let's get started with the actual gameplay. So Zestiria 2 was the previous game on this sort of a franchise, and Zestiria also in every Tales games, the combat has always evolved in some way. If I go back into my first Tales game which I played, which was Symphonia, which I'm replaying now as the Redefinitive Edition, which is gonna be reviewed at some point on the channel, is that they have become or have made the combat more and more freer as more titles have gone by. Like you're able to free move in the circle, so to speak, you're able to dodge and block, and there has been more expansion on that gameplay system. So Zestiria is kind of improving on those previous games. You have lots more freer movements and combos and mystic arts. It has all of those elements that you have familiar from the previous Tales games and being really faithful to the combat idea. The base feel I though had was that the SP system was a bit more mana hungry or SP hungry compared to some of the other games. I felt like in Symphonia, for example, you had a lot more room or ability to spam the abilities a lot more than you did in Zestiria. So I think in this one you kind of had to block or so-called to regenerate your SP basically, so you could cast spells and stuff like that. So I think there was a bit of a difference in there. But I did like the combat altogether. It's pretty fluid. There's no camera problems, so to speak. If there are some very minor ones in certain very specific areas. That's not going to be a major problem on the game. It's best to be played on a controller. Obviously, mouse and keyboard is probably not the most suitable for a Tales type of a game, even when you're playing on PC. There's also other things that were added into the game, such as item combining system. I'm not sure was that in Zestiria because I played it a very, very small amount. This was a system that was very familiar to Final Fantasy XIII, which I reviewed not too long ago. And in that one, you also had the same problem where you could combine items and make the base item stronger, which you would get in the very beginning of the game. But you would not know what type of traits and statistics would be the best for the late game, or what would be the best item to eventually combine. The game doesn't really tell you much of that. And that's something that I don't necessarily like in item systems, that there's so many of these special traits in this game, like damage against winged opponents, dragons, armored, pesticides, or whatever bugs they were called. And then there's these SP, power, defense, attack, and regaining SP, block, and there's so many traits in the game, and it's hard to kind of navigate what is exactly the best and most viable throughout the game. And I just personally didn't like it. I kind of like the idea that you have a base items which maybe have a materia type of customization, and then you just get higher tier weapons which have more slots to basically enhance or attach something to them. That's kind of what I personally prefer as an item system. So this was definitely not for me. It was not a big problem, but it was a small minus for me. Also in the combat they added in this game was a fusion system where basically two of the main characters inside the game were able to fuse with these other characters, which are called the Seraphim, which are kind of these mystical spirits, which I will talk about later on the story section. And this kind of allowed you to access these elemental powers And elements have a lot to do with this game. So when you're playing something that has a weakness on fire, wind, earth, and water, which are the 4 base main elements, like these mattered a fuck ton, so to speak. Like these were really, really important aspects in every boss fight that you would choose and fuse with the right person to get the right element of power against this opponent. And that had a lot to do, maybe more than I would have liked to, because when you were using something that the opponent was immune, your damage was like, 3 times less than on the weakness element or something like that. But I think the elemental systems are kind of like rock, paper, scissors. It has its appeal and kind of integrates a bit of strategy inside it, but definitely like I felt like it had just too much over the balance of the game. When it comes to the graphics, I like them. There is a 30 FPS lock on also on Zestiria, which by the way, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, is the prequel game to Zestiria, and you can play that first and play then Zestiria. I haven't played Zestiria first, so I can't really comment which one of them should have been played first. You can do it on the chronological order. Maybe your value of Zestiria will become higher if you play Zestiria first, whatever. I think some people just played Zestiria because of Zestiria connection. So the FPS lock is something that you can remove with a mod. So every content or the gameplay you see in my footage is 60 FPS. And that was done through the mod. The mod is pretty good, easy to install. Just has a bit of a problem that it sometimes will make the game crash. Obviously there's quick saves and all that stuff in the game, which makes it really easy to reboot it so you don't really lose the progress. So that was pretty nice. So I didn't really experience that many crashes on the game, and the mod may work differently on different PCs and setups, but definitely something that you want to get, because the 30 FPS is a lot less ideal to play under. But this is something definitely they should have patched in my opinion, to choose between 30 and 60 FPS. What comes to the audio, I'm a big fan of the opening theme. There's other couple of tracks inside the game which are original, that are pretty good. The soundtrack in itself is pretty great, and I have nothing to really complain about it. There's also a couple of tracks that you can access to do special costumes inside the game. There were a lot of DLC made for the game. Sadly, not all of that DLC costumes are actually available on Steam, so they were like Japan region locked, sadly. So there were like Evangelion and other types of cross partnerships and interesting skins, which I would have, gladly have enjoyed. But you access some of the stuff by buying the edition, and some of the summer swimsuits and stuff like that is available. There's other accessories which you can customize a bit more than you could in some of the previous games, which was pretty nice. When it comes to the audio, the Japanese audio is better and superior in this regard. I'm not going to say the English one was totally horrible, but I prefer the Japanese one over the English one. I kind of played on both, but ultimately I think the Japanese one is just better and better performed. One of the big, so Zestiria, when we kind of recap these stuff, Zestiria is meeting the standards of all the Tales games, as in like great gameplay, nice combat, which is fast, and you don't have like 10-minute, 15, 20-minute boss fights or normal fights. And graphics are good, and the item systems and all of those are like not glitchy or kind of easy to learn. And it's kind of like traditional game in that sense. It's meeting all those standards. But one of the big problems in the Tales franchise always been level design compared to a lot of other JRPGs out there, in my opinion. Like, there are a lot of dungeons and caves which are using the same assets. They just have a different color gradient onto them. So you had bunch of caves and dungeons that looked exactly the same, and this was pretty redundant. Top of that, where I've always kind of said that Tales games never really had a really good level design. When I look at Final Fantasy games, even these old ones, 7, 8, and 9, they had amazing cities which were iconic, and like many things like vehicles and all of that. And Tales always had good character designs. The characters look great, unique, and not so generic compared to a lot of anime. But Zestiria, and among other Tales games before that, always kind of had a bit of lackluster level design, especially now that Zestiria is an open world game. I feel like in open world games it's important to have immersion in the world, and you just had a lot of levels which were just grass and, you know, a couple of rocks there. It didn't look amazing or unique. It just lacked that, you know, flavor and uniqueness altogether. Like some of the cities, like Lady Lake, you know, it had that, you know, the water wheel, and a couple of things that kind of looked cool, but altogether, like, I felt like all the levels, even the last stage, kind of, you know, cliche and normal. But actually in the Tales of Ares, the new game that is coming out, the level designs look very, very nice, so that's something that they have improved. But let's finally talk a bit about the story, and this is where a lot of the problems come from. So there was a big problem in Japan, whereas one of the main characters in the game, which is actually many of the game covers and advertised in the actual trailers and everything, is actually just a side character, and she's called Alicia Difa. And she is not your party member throughout the full game. She is, well, let's just say, is like maybe kind of in the beginning she's a lot more, maybe like 5-6 hours of the game, and then she just disappears and comes like maybe 2 times back to the party for a very small period of time. So I definitely think that she, not loli, but kind of like a bit of a fan service, what I'm trying to say. Edna is the loli character here, pandering to that loli audience. But basically, Alicia's was like put into the DLC, which I'll review, you know, separately, which is a sequel to Tales of Zestiria story, which takes like 6 months after the events of Zestiria. And, you know, Alicia does, like, that was a big outrage in Japan because she was not part of the main cast. And I would have actually loved her in my main cast because I kind of liked her design. And also I'm a big spear guy, so spears are my favorite weapons in JRPGs. So I was kind of sad that she was only like a kind of like a side character there, which would apparently like be at times in the party in the beginning, but then would be not in the late game at all. And that was kind of dumb because the game wouldn't like necessarily tell you that at any point or anything like that. I think she should have been introduced as guest character so people don't invest money and items on her to make her stronger or anything like that. And, you know, that was a bit of an outrage, especially because the DLC wasn't free. It was free for like the first, was it 72 hours or something like that? You could get it for free, and after that you had to pay for it. And that was one of the big sides of the problem in regards to the story. The other one is that all the characters are very bland and not very interesting. Sorey, which is the main character, it's like a normalized version of Luke from Symphonia, and Rose is, well, a normalized version of Sheena from Symphonia. They were like very boring characters. And then you have the Seraphim, which are like these spirits that other people are not able to see, and only the Seraphim and the people who have signed the contracts are able to see them. So they were these like magical ghosts basically, and that's where a lot of the story is revolving around, the Seraphim and these, like, basically these demon guys who, and the Yoma basically are, or Hellion is the English name, and they are like similar, but they're like manifestation of evil or darkness basically, and they take forms in humans, but the humans are not able to see them, and that's where a lot of the story revolves around, and I didn't like that at all. I think it was not very exciting. It's kind of dumb. There's a lot of couple of story things I hate about JRPGs. Time traveling, main characters that don't talk, memory losses, and this type of magical creatures that other people are not able to see are like the most dumbest things. These are personal preference. Some people like it, some people don't, but I personally didn't like it, and it didn't help that the characters were bland and boring, and so was the story. The story lacked magnificent twists that I would care about, or good plot development or character development. I don't think Sorey or a lot of the other characters really, I mean, it goes into who can you kill Yoma, etc. It goes into those kind of like moral arguments, but I didn't feel like they were portrayed in a very properly way or in an interesting way, and I just generally just didn't like that story. It was boring and very generic, and it's just the weakest point, and that was the main thing that made me really have a hard time completing the game. because I had literally zero investment in these characters. Like, if Alicia would have been swapped with Rose, for example, the story would have been better. Alicia, to me, was a bit interesting character, a bit more flawed than Rose, and I felt like a lot of the other characters just didn't change or didn't show the sides of them which would make them inherently interesting. And also one of the problems in the game was that all of these evolvements that happen, like there's a war at some point, and the people are kind of like, the main cast is taking these events kind of casually, and there's not like a sense of urgency like in other JRPGs where people are escaping from a burning building or destroying city. Stuff like that is not inside this game, so they're like able to roam around in the world and nobody's like stopping them. The main evils just make them appearances to them and occasionally randomly, and they're not even like properly trying to stop them. They just talk about, well, you gotta do this because we're bad guys, and oh, by the way, the main villain was also goddamn cliche of like, oh, the darkness bro. Like it was pretty bad in terms of like storytelling, not only on the Tales scale but also on the universal JRPG scale. This was a pretty bottom performance. It was very, very bad. Luckily, I've heard good stuff about Zestiria, so I'm hoping that will be a lot better. But goddamn, this was a very uninteresting story, and it shows that even if you had all of these other sides, which were good, outside from the level design and some of the item systems I didn't like, is that I just couldn't, like, it was so hard to like get motivated and play the game through because the story was so hard to get invested into because of the stupid setup and the way it was written. It was just a mess. But kind of going back to the final conclusion of this review, Zestria is a good game. It's you know, if you're in for the gameplay, this might be a better experience. If you're looking for something story orientated, maybe not for you. There's a lot of side content inside the game. You can sink in 80, 100 hours almost to this game. There's a lot of side content, and you know, you can definitely sink in grinding and do these optional bosses, which there are many of them inside the game, which is pretty nice. So I think overall, like, it's not that bad of a game, but they really missed the mark on the story. I don't know if the anime does it better, and there's also a bit of a like kind of like a teaser that there could be a sequel to it, but due to the reception, it's a pretty controversial title in Tales. I don't think many people would say this is the best Tales, so people rank it kind of low on the overall rankings. But you know, if you're a story-oriented JRPG player, not the game I recommend. If you're in it for the gameplay hours and bang for the buck, it's a pretty good buy. You can get it pretty cheap now. And make sure to get the mod as well, because that 60 FPS is much more smoother to play on, and also play it on controller. Stay tuned for other JRPG reviews. Final Fantasy VII Remake coming out. First impressions and review is gonna come out when I get the chance. Symphonia's on my list, and if I get review copies for other games like Langrisser and Story of Mana or whatever it's called, those are also going to be on my list. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys on the next review.